Oh my goodness, you guys. This one is going to be so fun. And here's the thing, I didn't even really have to ask very many questions. Mary Keane is an author. She's a world traveler. She used to be in software. She has such life experience for us and so many stories that I can barely edit this puppy. I know it's long. I want you to sit down, get a cup of coffee, maybe a glass of wine, whatever does your thing, and listen, because the wisdom that comes from this woman's story is powerful. And I can't wait for you to listen. You're listening to Straight from the Psychologist's Mouth, a podcast that teaches women in midlife to unapologetically stop silencing their dreams and start designing the lives they want to live in. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie, and as a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a twice divorced single mother myself, I not only know how hard it can feel heading into midlife, I am living it right here with you. I have taken all the many failed attempts and lessons learned in my own life and combine it with my extensive clinical experience to give you the tools you need to make midlife the best time in your life. No joke. So let's get started. Let me introduce you to Mary Keane. Mary is an author and world traveler who left her corporate software job in 2022. From 2002 to 2015, she was an endurance athlete, running marathons and finishing long-distance triathlons, and coached newcomers in the sport, founding a triathlon club. Through her guidance, hundreds of women were empowered to overcome their fears of swimming in open water, riding a bike on the road, running any distance, and daring to race. In the fall of 2022, Mary walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, a historic 500-mile pilgrimage that has been continuously traveled for over 1,000 years. Mary's experience in endurance sports and coaching proved invaluable in her successful completion of the pilgrimage, and she has been able to use that experience to help fellow pilgrims with advice and guidance. Mary is fascinated by all things ancient, with a particular fondness for Stonehenges, burial mounds, and Templar churches. When she's not traveling or writing or reading about ancient landscapes, she can be found watching videos of archaeologists digging up pottery and bits of iron. She currently resides in Colorado with her husband, Jeff, who enjoys his own Stonehenge and burial mound almost as much as his wife, Mary. So here at Learn to Love Your Story, my whole shtick is helping women in midlife love the whole of themselves. Take a look at like their whole life, love all of it, and use that as a sense of empowerment as they're stepping forward and choosing the life of their dreams from this point forward. And so I like to ask my guests, just tell us your story.
Okay. Well, let's see. So I'll start with, there is a astrology chart. Not that I'm huge into astrology, but I like to dabble in lots of things. I always find that fun. And I think women in particular like quizzes. And so I think astrology sometimes feels like one of those quizzes, like, what version of Barbie are you? And so so years ago, I took this, and it's free, but it's pretty comprehensive chart. And then for an additional $20, you could like pay for it. It's all auto generated, I'm sure. And so, I'm reading through it. And what was fascinating about it was it said the first half of your life is going to be radically different from the second half of your life. And at that point, that was so true. So the first half of my life, we moved a lot. My father worked, first he was in the Navy, and then he worked on nuclear power plants. And so he worked for Westinghouse and then Exxon. And so we lived all over the United States, wherever there was a nuclear power plant, but also in Japan, and Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
So I really thrived when we were in Switzerland. I remember that I was in, that was fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And I did really, really well. And then when we came back, we went to near where you are, Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
because it's a big Westinghouse town. And so we were in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. And I know my parents felt like they knew that there was culture shock, right? I mean, there was no way not to have culture shock. I had been in Swiss schools. When I was in Switzerland, I went to like an international school. So I was there mostly with Americans, very small. But when in Switzerland, where we lived, there was no such international school. I would have had to get on a train every day by myself. I was fourth grade. Even my parents who would stick me in a plane by myself, and send us off and whatever. Even my parents thought that was a bit much, to go to Zurich. And so I went to school and I learned German, and I really fit in, because of course I look Northern European. Every place I am in Europe, the people just assume I'm either German, Swiss, Irish, even in Northern Italy. I'll walk into a store and people will address me, and so I just look very typical European. And then I came to Pittsburgh. So I am sure Pittsburgh is a lovely town, but they had no idea what to do with me. I mean, at that point, I was starting to lose English. And so, German would come out, and of course, it's kids, tease. I was not bullied. I was teased, which was okay. I'm big family. There's 3 girls, and I'm the oldest. And so by this point, let's see, I'm 4.5 years older than my middle sister. And she was born in Reading, Pennsylvania. And then my youngest sister was born in Switzerland, and she's 9 years younger than I am. So, my mom had her hands full. She just moved back from Switzerland. And so, I was kind of, figure it out. And so we were only there, though, for 6 months. And I was just starting to get, the whole hang of everything. And then my parents moved us to Florida. And so I remember my parents just being baffled that I was just bawling about the fact we were moving. They were like, we didn't think you liked it here. And I don't think they understood. I really didn't like moving.
Yeah.
I really didn't, especially at that age, and I am, to go with your theme, I am very thankful for that now. And I'll explain that a little bit later, why that actually came in very handy later on in my life. But I just really hated it. I loved making friends. I'm very, once I make a friend, I'm kind of like a barnacle. You never lose me. Warning. I never go away.
I'm never letting go. You're gonna have to strike me up. No,
yes, I'm a very loyal friend. And so then we moved to Florida, and the same, it was the whole cycle again, totally, baffled by, everything, such a different culture, finally started getting, used to it, actually became a cheerleader, very exciting. And in 9th grade, and was really fitting in. Oh, we're moving to the Seattle area. Woo! Okay, let's go from as far away from Florida as you can get.
It's like military brat, kind of, but
except
different.
There wasn't
the
same support that you get as a military brat.
That is true.
Yeah, sometimes I would meet kids who also moved a lot because their parents were in the military, but they went to like the base school, and the base knew what this was like, and they gave a lot of support. We had none. There was no support like that. You just get dumped into whatever, And my parents tried. When we were in Florida, my mother was convinced that we would do really poorly in public school, so they put us in the only private school that they could afford, which was a Southern Baptist private school. Yikes. That was, another culture shock, right? And so
totally.
Yes. And so, although I can tell you, I can match people Bible verse for Bible verse.
I believe this.
Yes. Oh,
you can't get through a Southern Baptist anything without that. Yes.
No, I have a really good grounding, in Bible verses. And so we moved to to Seattle area. It was Bellevue, very swanky, sort of suburb of Seattle. And yeah, things were going well. And then my parents decided to move my last year of high school. And I usually don't fight with my parents. You don't fight with Southern parents. I mean, you just don't talk back. That's just not allowed. Yeah. And I told them I was moving in with the neighbors. I was not doing my last year of high school in a brand new high school. So they figured out a way. They made some kind of, because we weren't moving. We were just moving out in the country. We weren't moving because of my job. We were just moving out in the country. And that was when I was like, oh, this move is not necessary. I don't need to be part of this.
I opt out. I'm sorry.
I'm out. So they figured something out. And but with all the moving and everything, I managed to graduate high school at 16. And so then I went off to college. My parents were like, yeah, you're just too young to go and stay at college. So they made me live at home for 2 more years. But it worked out fine. And then I, went to college. I met my, what was to be my first husband. And he had lived in New York City his whole life. Thought, we'll never move. This man has moved one time in his life. He went to the University of Washington to go to school. That's good. Oh, no. Oh, anyway, we started moving. Then we moved to New York City. And again, very interesting culture. But by this point, I'm starting to, learn how to kind of roll with it, right? This is my new life. I, kind of get involved in stuff. But New York was tough. It was really tough for a person who was used to taking a car to a grocery store. Yeah. Do that in the city. We lived on 5th Avenue and 10th Street. I mean, you could not pick a better place to live in New York City. It was very special. And we did as much stuff in New York City as we could possibly afford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's real.
He was working for NYU. It's not like we had any money, but he was working for NYU. And we saw his parents a lot and his sister. And but then he got a job at UCLA. And so we moved to LA. And at that point, I started thinking, okay, with all these moves and everything, first I'm changing everything in my life for my parents. Now I'm changing everything in my life for my husband. I have to do something for me. And I was trying to figure out what to do. I had ended up getting my degree in business. I'd worked in PR in New York City, was not a fan, went to UCLA, working at the chemistry department as an administrative assistant. And I'm thinking, what do I do now? And it was actually my ex-husband who said, I think you need to take an English class. Okay. Well, just to keep busy, they had extension classes. So I took one, and the professor who taught it was like, you really need to think about going into teaching English. He said, but be a professor. And he was really encouraging. He was like, here's what you do. You already have a degree. You just need you need some more courses here at UCLA. And then, you go on to get your PhD. Like, okay. So I thought that was great. For the first time, I actually had kind of a mentor, trying to help me, make this. And so I started taking the classes there, and then we moved again. Now we moved to Davis, California, which is outside of Sacramento. And but California State University, Sacramento had a good master's program in English. So I got a job at UC Davis. Worked there and worked my way into an editor position. And so wrote books on sheep, goats, and llamas. Because we were working, the program was working with farmers in lesser developed countries, or now we call them developing countries. And they were, it was all about sheep, goat, and llama farming. And so I wrote books on, how to keep the male goats from having gay sex.
Okay.
This is, we go to back.
It's important information somebody needs to know.
Yeah, it was, how to, tell whether, it's a goat or a sheep. That's tricky when it's hairless sheep, because they had hairless sheep in Indonesia because it's just too hot for all the wool, right?
I get it.
But the sheep are much more docile than goats are. and they were using them in the rubber tree plantations. And so they had hairless sheep. And so, you have to know how to tell a goat from a sheep. So,
Yep.
in case you're now wondering, it's goat's tails go up, sheep tails go down.
All right. Well, that's simple enough.
You learned something new today. Now you will know. So, and I was getting my degree and things were going well. And, Davis just, never really suited us. It was kind of rural at the time. And so, Frank just, he was looking for another job. And so I suggested Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz. I love the ocean. I'm really, a West Coast girl. Give me my ocean, I'll be happy. And he got the job. And so at that time I was applying PhD programs and I didn't get into the one I wanted. I got waitlisted and they told me that they thought they would have the funding, for me the following year. So I'm like, all right, great. I've been an editor now. I write articles on Go Cheat to the Llamas.
Yep.
Well, I can write tech stuff. Why not? So I got myself as a job as a tech writer in a very tiny company, 12 people, down near Santa Cruz. And very quickly realized I was never going to make this kind of money as an English professor.
Yeah, I believe that.
It really didn't take long at all. So, and I really liked it. I loved it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And I loved working with it. I loved the software. I'd always been the person in the offices who set up the computers and got, fixed them and everything else. I'd always loved it. We got a Mac in January of 1985.
Oh, wow. So,
come out. I love computers. And so they asked me, because my boss left and he was the head of engineering. They asked me, they said, so you've managed people before. You think you can manage engineers? I'm like, sure, why not? So suddenly I was the manager of software engineers. And so I took some classes at community college. I taught myself how to code with their help. And that was now the next part of my life. So first part of my life is all about writing and, sort of traveling for other people and moving, all this other stuff. Now I'm in a place I love. I'm making friends. I absolutely adore it. And I have a job that I love. And so that is the next trajectory of my life until it falls apart.
Okay.
So it, like everybody's, there's ups and downs, right? And so, my ex-husband was never crazy about Santa Cruz. He's a New Yorker, it was a little tough, people wave, hi, surf, it's a little and he wanted to move. And I was like, oh no, I am not moving. No, not moving. And but by this point, I was also very heavy, much heavier than I am now. And I had always been a heavy girl. And I had a doctor who insisted that I go see, and I had type 2 diabetes by this point. I had developed that in Davis. And so I had a doctor in Santa Cruz who insisted I go see a nutrition. I'm like, oh God, they're going to show me fake food. I don't want to see fake food. She's like, no, I think this one's different. So she sent me off to her. And I asked her when we were going to look at the fake food. She's like, oh, no. She's like, I can tell you know all this stuff, but you just don't know these two things. She said, I want you to do two things. And this woman completely changed my life. She said, I want you to eat between 150 and 200 carbs a day. She said, I don't care if they're protein bars and all morning, and then the rest of the day you eat meat and salad. She said, I don't care what it is. It doesn't have to be broccoli. It doesn't have to be spinach. I don't care what it is, because I was very busy. I was already very active and I was working out with a personal trainer. And she said, and the other thing you need to do is what you're doing with that personal trainer, you need to do 6 days a week, 1 hour, 6 days a week, very intense exercise. I'm like, oh my God. And she said, that means you're going to find something you love. Because that's going to be tough if you don't find something you love.
Yeah, she's not wrong. Yeah.
No, she's not wrong. She's not wrong, because I really didn't like lifting weights that much, which is what the personal trainer had me doing a lot of that. So I'm like, all right, well, I've always wanted to fence. that always, I had this long history of reading, and I loved, the idea of being a knight and all this other stuff with swords. And I'm like, well, I could take up fencing, and they had a club, and I went. First thing that happened was, so first I walked in, it's all men. There's very few women in fencing. And so I walk in and it's all men. And that was actually probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was to continue walking through that door, because they were also all skinny. But I kept walking in, and I went in, and they were very nice. None of the uniforms fit me that they had, the sample uniforms for the beginning class. And so we figured something out, and so started fencing, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And so I just kept doing it, and I, lost a little bit of weight, but then, I was about to turn 40, and a friend of mine, she's 2 years, her birthday's 2 months after mine. She was about to turn 40, and she's like, we need to do something epic for our 40th birthday. She's like, let's do the eco challenge. I'm like, no, I don't want to die. I mean, people had died on that thing. And so I had walked a marathon with my sister the year before, and I was like, we could walk a marathon. She's like, no, that's going to take too long. Now, she's about as heavy as I am. So, this is about 80 pounds heavier than I am right now. And so I'm like, don't know that we can run.
Yeah.
Yeah. When was the last time you ran a mile? For both of us, it was like in high school. So we go to the bookstore, because of course we're readers, and we find the Non-Runner's Guide to Running a Marathon. And we followed that book religiously. And we ran the Seattle Marathon. And one of the things that happened
Good for you.
The weight we could not eat enough. It was, it's everything that nutritionist had told me about really sustained, long exercise. Trust me, we were not that fast. We were very slow. But it was just the length of time that we were spending moving our body. And we actually moved through that. We broke through the metabolic syndrome. It's basically
yeah.
And so, again, another change in my life. Now I'm a runner. And people keep meeting me, and I, of course, as I mentioned to you, don't wait. Just wait. Somebody will tell you that they run marathons, they do triathlons, all this other stuff. They're a fencer. And so people would meet me, and I would, of course, tell them that I had run a marathon. And they were like, whoa, I could see it in their eyes. Well, hell, if she can run a marathon, I can run a marathon. I mean, if she can run a 10K, and so I developed like this little following of people who just started saying, well, hell, if she can do it, I can do it.
I can do it. Yeah.
Yes, I can do it. And so, there were people who started running 10Ks, and I started joining groups. Like I joined in these, the triathlon club, and I joined there were 2 triathlon clubs. One was women only, one was a mixed group. Started making friends with the fencing and everything. I mean, oh my God, it was so awesome. And my husband could not take it. He just couldn't take it. I was changing. I had friends. I was, and I would have loved for him to come along with it. It was not his thing, and he was actually kind of mean about it. Like after I walked that first marathon, oh my God, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done an Ironman, and I will tell you, walking that first marathon was harder than doing an Ironman triathlon. And when I called him, as my sister and I are laying in bed with bags of ice on our legs. And
exactly.
He's like, I did it. We did it. We finished. It took 8.5 hours for us to do it, but we did it. And he's like, yeah, and I was in my 20s. I walked 25 miles for the March of Dimes. It's not that big a deal. And it really broke my heart.
Yeah.
And it just went downhill from there. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it went downhill. And so, long story short, I ended up getting a divorce, and I ended up moving to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Because fortunately I sold my house right before 2008.
Ooh.
Yes, because I had ended up with the house and I sold it. Oh man, I was lucky. And but my sister had 3 kids who in 4 years. The oldest one had some
Wow.
issues, and I was flying out there a lot. I was working from home. Our small company had gotten acquired by a giant company, and so they didn't care where I was. And so I moved out to Wyoming to help out. I lived 2 doors down from my sister. My parents had moved there. They were 6 blocks away. And so, yet again, another huge culture change. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
But
Wyoming.
you've like over this, course of all this, like you've probably got a superpower in pivoting and relearning,
Yes,
the new nuances of the culture in a new
yeah,
place and
yeah,
making it your home.
it is. And that is really what then led to, so, I was in Wyoming, and I met this lovely man who was a retired federal law enforcement. So totally different than anything I do. I've never
Yeah.
done before. But he also turned out to be a psychic and a medium. And oh, trust me, I cannot tell you how much joy I got at work.
Yeah.
All these software engineers, all guys, we go out to lunch or something like that. And I just drop into conversation that my husband was a medium and a psychic. It's nothing like it. There really is nothing like the look on people's face.
I can't even imagine.
No one ever expects that, and so you never expect the Spanish Inquisition. No, you never expect, this software, person to yeah. So anyway, it was lovely man. But by this point my company really wanted me to come back to the Bay Area. So we went back to
Yeah.
the Bay Area. So another pivot back to the Bay Area. But I just, at this point, I was not doing well at work. As I moved up and I moved out of managing software engineers and that creative thing, and moving up into administration, I ended up being a director. I swear I was a director of meetings. That's what I did. And I became very depressed. I was on a lot of medication. My doctor was threatening to lock me up at one point. But I got the medication dialed in.
Mhm.
But it was tough.
Yeah.
Tough. And we, even being back on my beloved ocean and, loving it. But, then we moved again because it was just like the rents were going up and I was refusing to pay that amount of money for a shack. They wanted $750,000 for a shack, and it wasn't even anywhere near the beach. And I was like, no,
So crazy.
it was crazy. So, we ended up out in Ohio because I felt guilty about how much time my husband was spending with my family. So we ended up there because that's where his family has a small farm. And so that was lovely for a year. And my sister was twisting my arm to go back. It's like, I can't do Wyoming again. So we came to Colorado. I was like, how do you feel about Loveland, Colorado? Because we loved Loveland. It's a very artsy community. It's just south of Fort Collins. And
Okay.
yeah, so if you know where Fort Collins is,
Yeah, I do.
they're melding together like many places, but it's still its own separate little. I found a house that was just a short walk to the sculpture garden. We have like a world famous sculpture garden here. There's 187 sculptures in this,
Wow.
and it's like a mile walk around. That saved me during COVID because we
I'm
closed our
sure.
house the week that the country shut down. That's when we closed on our house. So we lived, but fortunately my sister and my brother-in-law, they ended up moving to Fort Collins from Cheyenne, and we, as a foursome and as a family, they got 3. She still has those 3 kids.
Mhm.
It was wonderful. I mean, I had family around. We are 30 minutes from the Rocky Mountain National Park, so we went hiking all the
Beautiful.
time. We are on lakes, and so paddle boarding. I mean, it really was great. And yet, I'm still on medication. And so I knew, and I had said this repeatedly over the years, but nobody really ever wanted to hear me. And this is not true for everyone, but I knew in my heart that for me, it was my job. I knew that
Mm.
it was my job. There were many things about it. There are people, and there are people who have taken over my job who love that type of work. But running, I had 1 week where I had 40 meetings in 1 week. 40. That is cruel, I think, to a
That's
person
cruel.
like me. I like to sit down and work Well, sometimes I'll sit down and I'll get up and I'll realize it's 4 hours later. You know,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love the flow and I love to think about things really hard. And although I love people, on the introversion scale, I'm more on the other side of the introversion scale than on the
Gotcha.
extroversion. I love being around people, but then I need to go away.
Yep.
And so I knew it was the job. My hair was falling in and had been for years. I the mental, I kept gaining weight again. I was back to gaining weight, even though I was still exercising. It was like, so anyway, I kept calling the people who, the financial firm who had my 401k, and I would call them every 6 months. Can I quit yet? Can I quit yet? Can I quit yet? They were so sweet. They were like, every 6 months we get on the phone, get Jeff in here. We talk about finances and like, not yet, not yet. And so finally, I was going to turn 59 and that year, and I called them up and I said, "Can I quit yet?" And they said, "As long as you have health insurance, you can quit. You're good."
This is doable.
Jeff has health insurance because he's a retired law enforcement
Yeah.
federal. He's got health insurance, and so I quit.
Good.
In a month, I was off of all the medications, and
Crazy.
It is. I mean, I knew it was the job, and I am working. Even Jeff will come up with you do know you're working just as much as you did before. I ended up
Such a different quality though when you work
yes,
for yourself and you're doing
I
what
am.
you want to be doing. You're in
Yeah,
like you can't wait to get up out of bed to go do that thing instead of
exactly.
I got to get through this day of things I have to do.
Yeah, yeah. And my hair is growing back. my okay. For women, that's a big deal. So if
That's
it's
a huge deal.
if a
We
man is
hate it
watching
when
this
it
now, you don't really understand. It is a really big deal.
huge deal.
It is.
Huge deal.
It is. And it's yeah, but when I was just at the hairdresser a couple of weeks ago and she's like, "Oh my God, you just have so much more hair." And it's a little over a year now since I quit. And one of the things I told them, because of course they did try to keep me. God bless them, they did. But when I told them what I wanted to do, it pretty much even, I had VPs calling me, I think it was going up like, please, please don't let her go. Who else is going to run all these meetings for us?
I know.
I told them, I said, I have plans. I said, I want to write. And I have this pilgrimage that I have wanted to do for 28 years. For 28 years in the back of my mind has been this pilgrimage that I read about 28 years before. And I really needed to do this pilgrimage. It kept calling to me and calling to me. And when I read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, what's the one about not letting go of the ideas?
Eat, Pray, Love. Oh, Big Magic.
Big Magic. Yes.
Big Magic.
And when I read that book, which was a couple of years before all this, it scared the living daylights out of me that I was letting all of these ideas for books and writing and this pilgrimage. It was, it had lingered for 28 years, but at some point it was going to go away. That call.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was so strong. And so when I would tell them that, it was like, okay, they didn't even like continue like trying to up anything. I mean, I think people realized that it was time for me to do something else. And so first thing we did was get in my husband's Sprinter van. He built a little frame on it, put our guest bed on it. So we had a queen size bed and that's it. And boxes, lots of crates. And we left for 2 months and we drove around the East Coast and we visited a lot of family and I really got into this kick about ancient civilizations. And so we were going to see every ancient city that we, especially like Navajo, the Pueblo people, and so on. But there are ancient ones in like the Mound people in the middle of the country. And so we went to Poverty Point, Louisiana. And, my husband, he's like, cool. We're looking at lumps in the ground. That's awesome. He's so sweet. It's like we're really in the middle of nowhere. Poverty Point is nowhere. And but there was like a couple of mounds still left. It's a 3,000-year-old city. I mean, I was just in heaven. So I was doing that, and I'm writing about that, and then we come back, and I start planning for this pilgrimage, and I walked over 600 miles around our town of Loveland and Fort Collins in Colorado, and up in the Rocky Mountains. I'm doing all this stuff. I've got the backpack on. Every couple of weeks I'd add more weight to the backpack. I'm trying out different clothes, and now I've got the hat. I've got the hiking poles. People think I'm weird all over Loveland, but there were some people that I met because they were like, okay, you're obviously doing something. What exactly are you doing? And, I tell them. And so I actually made a few friends along the way.
Yeah.
I would see on the walk, and which was great. And so, August 31st of last year, I got on the plane and I flew to Paris. And one of the things that had happened over that 28 years, I'm sure you have probably gotten the idea now that if I can run 40 meetings, I am at heart a project manager, and I will project manage everything to death. Spreadsheets, oh my God, I love spreadsheets. So I will take everything. I have, every day I start with a to-do list. I know you've seen the to-do list.
I have seen your to-do list.
Has to be checked off. But for some reason, I never researched the pilgrimage. I didn't. I had read this. It was actually a book review. And it was a book review of a guy who did this 28 years ago. It's 29 years ago. And I read the book review. I never read the book. But once I knew about it, I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this. And he had started in France. So I was going to start in France, because I did get the guidebook. There was this very famous guidebook that does what they call a stage, his suggestion of how long you walk. And he gives some details about it, like elevation gain and stuff like that, and some of the things you'll see. But that's about it. But there are a lot of books about it. There's lots of things on the internet, blogs. There's a forum. And fortunately, I did actually look at the forum a couple of times before I left, and realized that I probably should. My plan had been to get off the plane and go directly to the town where I was going to start, and then start the next day. And people on the forum, other people had that thought, and they were like, you really need to take at least a day to kind of acclimate to, because you're talking about an 8-hour time difference as well.
Yeah.
And so I spent the night in Paris, and, of course, being me, I decide I need to walk around. I need to go down and see Notre Dame because, they're rebuilding it, and all this other stuff. I walked over 9 miles that day. I just right after getting off of an airplane. Okay. So yes. Okay. I'm an idiot. And some friends.
You weren't just zealous. You were excited. That's all.
Exactly. So I get off of so I did realize when I'm down at Notre Dame and I'm having something to eat and I'm looking at, my Fitbit, and I'm like, ooh, okay, 9 miles. Okay, I took the metro back. I did not. So the next morning, I had figured out the train system the day before. So got on the train and, ended up in this small town called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And it's a very medieval town. And that's where, if you're going to start and you're going to climb the Pyrenees first, that's where everybody starts. You go to a little pilgrim's office and they tell you what to do. And I stayed in my first hostel, and I had made a reservation because that's what they said on the forum. Make sure you make a reservation for the first night and then for the second night, because everyone starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and goes to Roncesvalles, and there's one monastery there. So make a reservation. They were also starting to talk about how, because during COVID, Europe really shut down even more so than we did, and a lot of hostels had closed down. They just couldn't support it because people weren't coming, and also because of nobody had done it for 2 years, and the Pope decided that it was going to be a holy year. So the holy year was actually technically in 2021, but he extended it to 2022 because of COVID. Now, a holy year is, you're Catholic.
Yep.
You may understand this. So
means a lot of people will be coming to do that pilgrimage. Yeah.
Because in theory, this was a big deal. So this pilgrimage has been going on for 1,000 years ago. And so people in old days of indulgences, if you did the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela and you finished, you would get half time off your time in purgatory.
Yeah.
If you do it during a holy year, you get full time off your time in purgatory. Now, the Catholic Church doesn't talk about this anymore. I happen to know this because, of course, I'm a fan of history. But the holy year, even though they don't talk about it, and I don't think a lot of Catholics even know about it anymore, it still draws people out.
Yeah.
You know, the holy year, it's a big deal. And so anyway, they went from, in 2019, before COVID, about 200,000 people did the pilgrimage. And that was considered a banner year. Last year in 2022, over 400,000 people did it, which meant people were competing for beds, especially. Especially for beds. This was, and with some of the hostels had already closed down, there's even less beds. So it was kind of crazy.
I am sure.
Yeah. So I was so excited though. And I didn't quite understand this yet. I mean, people didn't know quite how much, but on the forum, they're talking about how many people are out there and how people are really struggling to find beds and stuff, but you don't really realize until you're there. And now I had not done any research, remember? So all I kept telling myself is the minute I step on the path, everything will be easy, because it really truly is. You just get on the path. There are way markers everywhere and you walk west. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Just keep walking west until you hit Santiago de Compostela, about 500 miles away. And so I wasn't really worried about anything. You know, I figured I'd work it out as I went along, because remember, I've grown up all over the world, right? I have a smattering of Spanish because my ex-husband's Spanish. I don't think I that, but he's Spanish. Yeah, he's Spanish. And, you know, we lived in Germany, so I can speak German, and I've got a smattering of French, and, you know, and heck, I grew up on airplanes, right? Back when kids did not. We were used to get on an airplane. So, yeah, I wasn't worried about it. You know, I trained. I knew what I was doing. All right, get the backpack on. First hostel is interesting, you know, and the guy was took his job as a host very seriously, you know, like made sure we all understood, you know, like there's some rules. You can never put your backpack on your bed, ever. This is how they're keeping the bed bugs down. You're just not allowed to put your backpack on your bed. And, you know, there was other things. You never walk in with your shoes on, you know, just other things. And my first hostel, and it was great. My problem at this point is I can't eat dairy. France was a challenge. I can't eat gluten, or I shouldn't. That's actually going to have to change. I can't have coconut oil. I can't have tapioca. You know, there's so many things that I couldn't eat, and I was really nervous because I didn't really want to get, you know, sick on the pilgrimage. And so at this point, I actually haven't eaten a lot since I arrived in Europe, especially France. They put cheese on everything. God love them. And so.
Good cheese, but still cheese.
I knew that Spain was not going to be like that because my husband was Spanish. I know Spanish cooking. I'd been to Spain before. I knew that cheese is not a big thing over there. So I wasn't too worried about that. But I was at a hostel dinner when they hand you what you eat. I didn't know what was in that soup. You know, was it full of cream? Was it, you know, is it, you know, so I'm really not eating a whole lot. And this is really partly going into, and it's hot. It is so hot. Now, I live in Colorado. The summers here are hot, but they're dry. Yeah. It's so humid at this point. It is now like September 2nd, but it is still so humid. And so get my backpack on, step out onto the pilgrimage. Oh my God, I'm practically vibrating. I'm so excited. And I walk for about 3 minutes and a man stops me. God. And he's this Australian guy. He's wearing the most colorful shirt I've ever seen. And he's like waving at the pilgrims and stuff. And he comes over and he proceeds to capture me for like 20 minutes and talk to me about, he had done the pilgrimage before. He was going to start the next pilgrimage the next day. And I'm going, why is this man? He already knows what this is like. Why is he like talking to me for 20 minutes here?
Yeah.
Finally extricate myself, but he had to tell me about this one magical spot. He made me take a picture of it with my phone on his phone so I'd know where it was when I got there. Okay, so I start. Finally, okay, interrupted, but start again. Oh, I like to think that he saved me from something. I don't know. There were cars on
Yeah.
the road. Maybe somebody would have hit me. Maybe,
Maybe.
you don't know what's going to happen. So I like to think that maybe he was an angel in disguise. We don't know. So I start, and it is rough. It is so hot, and it is so humid, and it is so steep, and my backpack hurts, and I'm just like, this is not what I thought this was going to be like at all.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so anyway, it was a rough climb. I did meet a few people, and that kind of what kept me going. But and I'm doing my best to stay positive. This is the pilgrimage. I'm starting to worry that the whole pilgrimage is going to be like this. And I finally make it into that monastery, and I walked in and I burst into tears. I mean, I was just sobbing. And this kind Dutch woman comes over. The whole place is being run by Dutch volunteers. This is the funniest thing. I mean, okay, random. All right. But
Okay.
she comes over, she takes me aside. First, she makes sure that I have a reservation. Now, I don't understand why at this point that this is such a big deal, but I'm like, yes, I do. She's like, okay. In between my sob, sits me down, gets me some water, takes my backpack off, tells me to take a break. And the place is packed. I mean, there's all these pilgrims coming, and I had thought I was the only person left on the mountain. Oh no, there's people still coming and coming and coming. And so we just as I stand up, she comes over. She's like, are you ready to go? Can you check in now? I'm like, yeah, I think I'm good. So I stand in line, and they closed the place down to anybody who didn't have a reservation. So all those pilgrims that are now standing in there and still coming
Yeah.
now, they did a great job. They did organize taxis for them. They called other places. They made sure that they had a place to sleep. But I was lucky. And so got my pilgrim dinner of a piece of trout, little trout.
Hmm.
Tea, which of course I took a picture and sent it to my sister because she doesn't believe that people actually serve fish in Europe with the heads on. Of course they do. They always do. Yeah. And managed to get some sleep, but I'm just really worried about it. So I made a reservation for the next day just in case. I didn't know what was going on now. So that was the first day. And
Wow. What would be your advice to women having gone through this really epic experience of following what nobody else believed? Hair's falling out, you're still on medications, you still just can't make your life feel like it's in alignment, and you knew it was the job thing. And then you did this crazy thing where you fly across the world to go walk for 500 miles and write a book about it. Thank God. But what would be your wisdom to impart for women who still are feeling stuck in their life?
Yeah. And it's easy for me in some ways. I don't have children. I mean, I have nieces and a nephew who I adore, but it's not like they need me every day, right? I mean, this is much harder for somebody who has kids or
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a husband who has health insurance so
Right.
so I do know that I am very, very blessed in a lot of ways because of that. And so I could do these things. I would say, so this weekend I was helping to run a teenage girls camp they were exploring their careers mostly with technology and so on. And there was a woman who came to speak. She was a retired journalist, had been, like pretty high up in journalism, and she was talking to the girls, and it turned into a lecture to the girls to make them be very cautious. And I was so gritting my teeth at this point
Mm.
because girls get this speech all the time. Women do too. We are taught to be afraid. We are taught to be worried about our surroundings, stranger danger, all these other things. And I think we get enough of that. I don't think that when you're, 12 and 13 years old, you need yet another woman standing in front of you telling you stories about stalkers. And I know that she had a horrible experience with a stalker. It does not mean that all these girls will. And I would say, first of all, I would love for women to get more bold and stop being so afraid. And if you are afraid, to learn statistics. There are a lot of books out there that will tell you that the statistics of things happening to you are very low, very low. It's amazingly low. You have a much greater chance of dying in a car accident than pretty much anything else happening to you in your entire life.
Yeah.
And I would love for women to start understanding statistics because, yes, I spent 500, I was in Spain, France and Spain for 2 months. I was staying in different hostels with hundreds, sometimes thousands of other people around me. And yet I was not afraid for my safety. One, because I'd been to Spain before, and Spain is, in terms of violent crime, really low.
Yeah.
Okay, pickpockets, you got to watch your wallet, but people there are like anywhere. People in general are just kind. They look out for you. When I lived in New York City, for 2 years in the 80s.
Yeah.
New York City was not the prettiest place in the world, and people were scared. I never had a problem. Tourists flocked to me because I was the only person who would ever smile at anybody in New York City. And so even though they didn't know that I wasn't from New York City, I guess somehow people knew. And so, and I always had a map in my bag, and I actually had, back then, getting a hold of a subway map was like gold, and I had gotten and so I could tell people where they were going and how to get there. And it is the same way for every place. I have always been very blessed by people. So after the 3 days in the pilgrimage, I came to a large town, Pamplona, and I had met some people who happened to be doctors who made sure that by this point I was not feeling well. And a lot of it was because I was dehydrated and I wasn't eating. And so they made sure that I stayed in a hotel with some air conditioning, and I spent an extra day there, and I lost my phone. Now, my phone has not only my phone, but it has my credit cards. It had most of my cash, and it had ATM cards and my vaccine card, which, is a big deal.
Ooh, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal. And my driver's license. So I did still have my passport. And I now know people in Spain. And also, I could have called on my ex-husband's family. I would have been okay. And I reminded myself, people walked this 1,000 years ago without a phone.
Yeah.
Without anything. And yet I got my phone back. There were so many people in Pamplona who made sure I got that phone back. Now, part of it was my husband, who has a very creative brain. And when I called him to tell him what happened, he started sending text messages to my phone with the name of the hotel and the phone number, and saying, if you find this, please return it. And the hotel got a call about 45 minutes later that it had been found, and it was at the town hall. Now, in between all this, I had gotten lost on the bus. I gotten on the wrong bus, going the wrong direction. And all these women were helping me. The hotel clerk, nobody ever charged me for this phone call back to the United States to my husband at the hotel. There are so many wonderful people out there if you just let people help you. And that is what I would really love for women to understand. We're so trained to be cautious and afraid, and especially strangers. But if you think about yourself, how do you react? How do I react to a stranger that needs help? Part of it is, I've lived in big cities. I've been in San Francisco. I've been in New York City. I've been around homeless people. I've been around people who think they're God or Jesus or Napoleon or whatever. And yet even as a kid, I always somehow picked up this thing. When I look at somebody, the first thing I think to myself is, this is a child of God.
Mm.
This is a child of God. No matter if they're screaming that they're Napoleon, that doesn't mean I'm going to go up to them and give them a big hug.
Yeah.
But if you train yourself to remember that every person that you interact with is a child of God, it doesn't mean you have to get close to them or anything else like that, but it does really change your interactions with strangers. And,
Yeah.
and you just at some point have to assume that if you have any type of religious background at all, you have to trust that God or Allah or, Shiva, whatever one you believe
Yeah.
in. And I'm actually more of an animist than anything else. I believe that there is spirits in everything, rocks. I talk to rocks.
Mhm.
Why not?
Yeah. Why not? Exactly.
Yes, but I mean, it's more like, if you believe that God is in everything, in every person, it really does kind of change your outlook on what's going to happen.
Yeah, it does.
Yes, bad things can happen. I fell. I had to walk 135 miles with a broken tailbone. Oh my God, that hurt. And it turns out later that it was actually also a torn labrum in my hip. Okay, that hurt. But there were so many people that helped me through that and came to my aid. And I have
Yep.
these wonderful people now that are totally great friends. And that is what I would want for everyone. I would want that for everyone.
So just to shift their orientation from being fear-based in their life and cautious and following a path that they know is tried and true and set forth for them, versus like seeing the interconnectivity of all things. We're all God's children. We're all, part of this big universe together. And there's as much to be grateful and appreciative of as there is to be feared, if not more. And so orienting yourself there and having that be your true north on your compass is helpful rather than to be guided by the caution itself.
Mm-hmm. And listening to myself. I mean, I did let myself for years be led by the money that I was making in a tech job.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
They paid me a fortune to be on those medications. And I love the people. The people also are terrific people. I mean, I absolutely adore the people I worked with. And it's the work itself. And so I should have left years before. And I should have, it's just one of those things that, remember the whole thing. I don't know if we were recording at the time, but I told you that I'm like a barnacle. I'm very loyal. And I mean, once I make friends, I don't leave them. And so that was part of it. And so I would say that with everything that we've talked about, I am still that same person who was depressed in that job, even though, I have this background and, and I meditate and I do all these other things. The job still was just not the right one for me. It wasn't creative enough. It didn't allow me enough time to think deeply about something. And so I would say that part of this also is you're just going to sometimes have to go against the flow. Yeah. The number of people that told me I was insane for leaving this job, and I could understand from their viewpoint. I mean, it paid really well. I lived in Colorado. I didn't have to go to the office. It was, and yet it just wasn't the right thing for me. And you stepped into that and honored that and used the privileges and gifts and blessings that you have to be able to do that. Exactly.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure, Mary, having you on. When you do decide what this next book is all about, and we want to come on again, I would be more than happy to have you.
Thank you. Natalie, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for being such a wonderful listener.
You're welcome. That's what I do for a living. Wasn't that amazing? Mary will be on again. Mary has many more books that she is going to be authoring, and she and I just cannot stop talking about all things fun and nerdy and ancient and whatnot. So you'll definitely get a little dose of women empowering women with Mary Keane again. But wasn't this such a great interview? I really enjoyed it. And I really hope that on your path to learning to love your story, it helped you too. All right. So I'm adding a little addition here. It's the legal stuff. Just so you're aware, nothing in any of these podcasts constitutes actual psychotherapy. Yes, I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, but everything here is just educational in nature and is a suggestion of things that you could be doing in your own life to learn how to love the life that you're in instead of waiting for a life that you're dreaming of to come towards you. So just remember, this is not therapy. And if ever you need any resources for mental health, look in my notes and I'll always have a little blurb at the bottom where you can click on a link and get those services for yourself.